Welcome to the hottest spot for information, where you'll feel the burn as we conversate with some interesting individuals and their careers. Listen and burn some ideas for your future, or just tag along. I'm your host, Chloe Barnes, and today we have the Patrick Jackson. He is the Director of Business Development with Park Nuclear. So, Mr. Jackson, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Good to talk to you today.
Yeah, glad you're here.
So let's get started with just who you are, where'd you start, and where you are now.
Okay, so my name's Patrick Jackson. I'm actually from Madison, so I graduated from Morgan County High School in 2004. And then went off for college, lived in Atlanta for a while, and then moved back to Madison in 2012. So, but for my career, I got into the nuclear industry in 2009, mostly on the parts side or the supply chain side of the business. So I don't do a lot with splitting atoms or putting atoms together. I leave that to the guys that, yeah, not me. But I do help with helping those guys find parts. So we're in the nuclear industry.
Okay. So could you go into more depth about your role in Park Nuclear?
Sure. So at a high level, these nuclear plants are really old. Most of them were built in the late 60s, 70s, and some in the 80s. And so, as you can imagine, the systems that are in those systems are also quite old. And so to try and find components that go into those systems can sometimes be challenging. And so I help plants that have hard to find parts, either help make one that's identical to what they had or source one that they need and then provide them where they can continue to use their old systems.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to kind of get a scope of what's out there, how vast is the nuclear realm? Like, how many reactors are there?
Yeah, so in the United States, there is just under 90 reactors that are active right now. It sort of fluctuates, so that today the answer is different than what it'll be 4 years from now or what it was 4 years ago, because they're starting new ones up and shutting old ones down. But what we do with but the industry in the United States, we get a lot of carbon-free power from nuclear power. Canada has quite a few. South America has several. Europe has a ton. France especially. And then now one of the largest constructors of nuclear power is Asia. So China's building them at a pretty fast rate. Russia's building several, but the Middle East is building a couple. It's tricky with the Middle East and the fuel cycle. So they have to sign a non-proliferation agreement with the United States, and so it gets geopolitical really quickly. But that may be a topic for a different day.
Okay, so it's pretty big, you'd say.
Yeah, sure, it's huge.
So what kind of job opportunities are there in the nuclear engineering field
Yeah, so at sites there's several different ways. So I'm going to talk nuclear plants for a second. There's several different ways to get plugged in. One is in the maintenance side. So the guys and girls that are actually welding pipes, turning wrenches, repacking valves, taking equipment apart, putting it back together.
So getting their hands dirty.
Yeah, getting their hands dirty. And so if, at most sites have about 1,000 people for one reactor, 2,000 for two reactors. Again, that's an average, right? But so there's the folks that actually put their hands on it. Then there's the guys and some girls, but a lot of it is ex-nuclear Navy guys that are nuclear engineers that actually operate the sites. So these are the ones that have engineering degrees in nuclear physics. They are actually driving the site, producing the power. So they're the ones maintaining or monitoring all the equipment in the control room to make sure that they're getting the power out that they need. And then there's all the support staff that goes behind. The maintenance folks are fixing the stuff. The operations folks are operating. And then you've got engineering, QA, supply chain people that buy the equipment. So there's a lot of ways to get plugged in. But I think your question was, what's the best way to get plugged in? Right now, the U.S. is planning to build up to 200 reactors in the next 30 years. Yeah. So with data mining, with data centers, with the advent of AI, we need a lot more energy than we currently have capacity for, and so they have to add to the grid. And to do that, they got to build new power. So there's going to be a huge need on the construction side to get where we need to be.
How do you think they're gonna tackle making that many reactors in that span of time?
We've done it before. In the 70s and 80s, we built, almost 100 plants in 20 years. But it's going to take leveraging new technology, working with the regulator to make sure that there's not unnecessary regulations, and then it's going to take revamping our supply chain so that the parts are available. And capital. It's going to take a lot of money.
Capital.
Yeah.
So have there been any specific new technologies that have changed this industry recently?
Yeah, I think software has gotten better and better. So when I first started, there was a lot of plants maybe that had the same part twice or same part 10 times because they didn't know what they had. And now with the advent of modern software, they're able to really consolidate their inventories down to a smarter level. So I'd say better software has really changed how they're buying patterns. But also, AI is coming in, robotics, drones, generative AI, a lot of as you can imagine, there's a lot of data that goes behind these parts. And so being able to look through a big data set and pick out what's important, it's gotten so much faster in the last 2 years than it has been for the last, say, 50.
Yeah, and I feel like it makes it a lot easier to feel safer with nuclear engineering when you have access to so much technology to just develop it.
Right, and I think nuclear engineering is such a broad term. At a power plant, there's going to be electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, civil engineers, chemical engineers, aerospace engineers, and then there's going to be a few that are actually nuclear engineers that are involved with splitting the atom and controlling the control rods and making sure the reaction stays where it needs to. It sort of stays in a pocket. Can't get too hot, can't get too cold, can't get too fast, can't get too slow. And they've got a lot of different mechanisms that they can control that. But that's a really small number of human beings at a plant that actually doing that. And they're called operators. And then outside of that, for a pump, you don't need a nuclear engineering degree to understand how to repack a valve or to maintain a pump. So there's a lot of, in that case, mechanical engineering. For a circuit breaker or a old circuit card, there's a lot of electrical engineering where you have to say, okay, what's critical? What failed on this printed circuit card? Mm-hmm. What was the problem with it? Go back with the electrical engineering and say, okay, this transistor is bad, it's obsolete, I need a replacement, what's equivalent? Being able to solder that back on and go about your day. So it's not just one discipline that's at a nuclear plant. There's several. Yeah.
So I know you go to these old places, find these older parts, but as you travel doing so, have you seen any new innovations in the field?
Sure. Advanced manufacturing is a big thing with being able to recreate parts. The nuclear industry is really hesitant to change. So a lot of modern equipment is digital, and a lot of digital has software. Inside of the nuclear plant, software is very powerful, but it can only be used in certain ways because inherent to software, it can be sometimes modifiable or you can compromise it. And so a lot of them still use old analog technology because you can't hack it. It's very safe. Okay. So I also think that getting to the answer faster is utilizing a lot of AI. So we've talked about that a little bit, but that would be the most modern thing that the plants are looking at right now is over the past 40 years, when this pump has had to be reworked, what process did we do, who signed off on it, how often are my maintenance intervals, that sort of stuff. AI can take a big data set and say, okay, we're going to predict that this pump needs to be reworked next year or the year after.
Okay. AI does.
Yeah, and they do. The monitoring's gotten so much better over the last monitoring of a motor. How much is it vibrating? What's the heat off the motor? When does it need to be rewound? That sort of stuff. And before, in 1978, they either maintained it frequently so that they never had a failure, or they would run it to failure depending on the application, and then they would rework it. Now they can monitor it and say, okay, this thing's vibrating more than it should. We're getting too much heat. Let's rework it. And so they put it into the planning.
Okay. a lot of the public's opinion regarding like nuclear meltdowns.
Uh-huh.
First thing
Sure.
that comes to people's minds. So a lot of people think negatively of this area. So what kind of regulations are present for the public safety, and what do you say to kind of get rid of that stigma?
That's a really good question. So in the history of the United States, we've had 3 Mile Island, which was a really well-known event where there was some radiation that was leaked. And then Chernobyl in Ukraine, or Russia at the time, but now it's Ukraine, I guess. And then also there was one in Japan when the tidal wave hit at Fukushima. So those are the like disasters that people would think about that come to mind. In most of those cases, the tidal wave was a little different. It took out the diesel fuel that was supposed to run the backup plant pumps, the backup pumps for the plant so that it could circulate water and cool the reactor down. And they didn't design for that when it was a 1,000-year event, and so it wasn't part of the design basis. And they also, the Japanese are very prideful in their culture, and so they didn't want outsourced help, or they didn't want extra help. And so even though the Navy was right there and could have helped them pump water, give them energy, they sort of wanted to do it themselves, right? But otherwise, as far as the current nuclear power plants, they're extremely safe. The deaths associated with nuclear power outside of those 3 isolated events is almost zero. When you look at safely producing power, it's not exactly zero, but it's very few compared to other forms of producing energy like natural gas or oil and gas, coal for sure, right? So as a whole, it's extremely safe. It's just a few bad apples make the whole thing smell, but.
And when those little apples kind of get a little famous, then
That's right. But if you look at the statistics, it's extremely safe. And the other one we hear a lot is spent fuel. Like, what do you do with it after you use it? And so there's a lot of different ways to look at that. One is they store it on site in these big concrete vats. Well, first off, they cool it in a pool that's not necessarily H2O, but it's a pool that's designed to calm the reaction down. Wait till it gets to a certain temperature. Then they put it in these big concrete storage tanks, and then from there they store them on site. Some countries are burying it deep underground so that it won't get access for millions of years, and it's very stable. And then now with modern technology, they're able to reprocess the fuel. So if you think about when you fill up your gas tank, you get maybe 93 octane in a BMW, and then maybe in the Honda Accord you get 89. So those are the ratings of the fuel you put in your gas tank. With nuclear fuel, it's enriched to a certain level, but when you use it, it just degrades below an efficient level to be used, and so they recycle or they refuel every 18 months, mostly with more enriched uranium. But now they've got a way to either re-enrich the stuff that has degraded, so they put it back in a centrifuge and get it back up to what it needed to be, or they've designed plants that'll actually run on the lower grade fuel. So there are really a lot of smart people figuring that problem out, and it's in many ways it's a big hot button issue, but not necessarily a long-term issue for nuclear power.
So how would you change the grade of the energy?
Different plants are designed to work off different fuels, and maybe we won't get too into depth into that, but what happens is there's an efficiency for the fuel itself, and once it gets below those certain thresholds, then they just can't produce the reaction as efficiently as they'd like to, so then they just use new fuel again, and they recycle the old, or they store the old on site.
Oh, that's right.
So it's not necessarily, it just degrades over time.
Right.
But doesn't necessarily go to zero value.
Okay, just recycling it essentially.
Right.
Okay. So while we're on the somewhat negative side,
Sure.
What are some downsides that you found with your position?
I'd say for me personally, I travel a tremendous amount. I'm going to a lot of the sites, going to conferences, going to industry events. And so for me, from a work-life balance standpoint, I travel a lot. For somebody that's at a site, nuclear plants, they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so sometimes having that work-life balance that everyone desires can be a challenge. But they're getting better with staffing and on-call systems and all that sort of stuff. But I'd say the other thing is the learning curve to get it's got its own language with acronyms and stuff. So once you learn all of what that means, it takes sometimes a couple of years before you actually really feel like you're contributing. Yeah. So other than that, it's just it's a small industry. Even though it's big, it's a small network of people. Yeah.
So what are the best things that have come from this?
I've gotten to meet a lot of interesting people all over the world. I've got to solve a lot of complex problems, and we get to keep these plants that are producing carbon-free power online. So that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're actually making a difference, because I know nuclear engineering or nuclear energy is scary, but I feel like it could be such a critical energy source.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I feel like we make a difference. If you can't operate the equipment safely, then they won't let you operate it. The regulators won't let you operate it. And then if that piece of equipment isn't working, then they can't run the plant. If they can't run the plant, they can't produce the power. So we help them stay online for sure, and I get to see it, firsthand every day, which is nice. Sometimes exhausting, but nice.
I don't think I asked you, how did you get into it specifically? What kind of opportunity?
That's a funny story. Another gentleman from Madison owns an engineering firm in Atlanta that dedicates test a lot of parts. And so I knew a family friend, and when I was looking for work, he was looking for a younger salesperson. And even though I didn't know a lot about the industry, at that time, they were really planning for a lot of growth. This was pre-Fukushima. And so I just kind of got in early, and after 3 or 4 years, really after 2 years, you sort of know what you're doing, and then it's hard to get out.
Yeah. You got over that hump while everyone else was too.
That's right. I think a lot of times it's who you know is going to help you. I mean, you can have the best resume in the world, but then you're just in a big stack of other candidates. But if you can think about your network and how you can get past that big stack and in front of somebody, I think that's a good advice, is to get on the phone and call people and see who they know.
Any tips for how you can find people even like that?
I would just say, get plugged in after graduation. A lot of times you're going to go to college, get a degree. But before you graduate, sort of start planning, go to some networking events, ask around. And then in the nuclear industry, as far as depending on where you want to go, they got a lot of good jobs fairs. So Southern Company is the closest one to Madison. They operate a plant near Augusta, Georgia, one down near Vidalia, Georgia, one in Alabama. So they will be the closest to home. Duke Energy's in the Carolinas. They're probably the next closest to here. So, yeah, then they'll have job fairs, and they're always looking for good people.
What's something you wish you told your younger self when you're starting out?
Yeah, I think people put so much pressure on themselves to do that one thing that they think that they need to do. Maybe you want to be a vet, and so you go all the way, you just double down on being a vet. But sometimes just seeing what you enjoy, seeing what you like, seeing what you're good at, and then finding a career that sort of meddles with that. Because for me, I would have been an awful vet, even if that's what I wanted. But I'm good at what I'm doing now. So it's sort of just figuring out what your skill set is, what you're passionate about, how you can help people, or how you can feel like you're helping people, and then something you can make a living at. And just sort of look at those criteria versus just I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or whatever. Because you may be through school, in some cases through grad school, and then realize, I don't really like this. But you're, $150,000 in school loans, and you feel like you got to do it. Yeah. So I feel like just trying to find something you enjoy is a key.
Kind of just figure out.
It will feel less like work every day if you actually like what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you don't like what you do, it really is a burden. No, I can promise you.
So basically, don't confine yourself.
I would say keep your options open, and then look at look at the signal. Like where is the industry? What industries are going to grow? Where are we going to have the highest need for a lot of employees? And then if you enjoy something that's going to be in demand, then the chances of you getting hired are way higher than if you get a lot of degrees but something in low demand, then there might not be a lot of turnover. There may not be a lot of opportunities. So, for example, if someone learned to weld pipe and went into the nuclear industry, they're like 150,000 people short of nuclear welders, and those guys make, some girls, but mostly males in this case, they make a really good living. And it's a trade school. It's not. Some of them have college degrees, but that's going to be in demand for the next 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. So it's not everybody likes welding pipe, so you got to figure it out.
Just figure out where you are and then what they need. I
think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
So to kind of close this out, why should people get into the nuclear side?
Well, it's going to be an industry that's going to be in demand for several more decades, probably the next 80 years, so most of your working lifetime, if not all of it. And I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. And so it's a stable industry. Once you get into it, it can be rewarding. You are making the country cleaner because you're producing the power at a really efficient way with a really small footprint, and it's carbon-free power. So I feel like the jobs will be there, and I would say that to anybody looking at getting into nuclear, feel free to reach out or also just talk to people that are in the industry and see where there's maybe your fit, because it's not all just like physics. It's not all just engineering. There's a lot of ways to fit in with a lot of different skill sets. Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking about nuclear, but I think I'm going to think about it a bit more.
Yeah.
So that wraps up my questions. I definitely felt the burn today, and I hope you did too. Thank you, Mr. Patrick,
no problem,
for your time and knowledge, because the more we hear, the more we learn. Have a great morning, afternoon, or night, and I'll burn you next time.